The words of the Gospel Luke, which have been preserved by the church and handed down for our hearing, our understanding, and our discussion this morning. Just then, a religion scholar stood up with a question to test Jesus. "Teacher, what do I need to do to get eternal life?" He answered, "What's written in God's law? How do you interpret it?" He said, "That you love God with all your passion and prayer and muscle and intelligence, and that you love your neighbor as well as you do yourself." "Good answer," said Jesus. "Do it and you'll live." Looking for a loophole, he asked, "And just how would you define neighbor?" Jesus answered by telling a story. "There was once a man traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho. On the way, he was attacked by robbers. They took his clothes, beat him up, and went off, leaving him half dead. Luckily, a priest was on his way down the same road, but when he saw him, he angled across to the other side. Then a Levite, religious man, showed up. He also avoided the injured man. A Samaritan traveling the road came on him. When he saw the man's condition, his heart went out to him. He gave him first aid, disinfecting and bandaging his wounds. Then he lifted him onto his donkey, led him to an inn, and made him comfortable. In the morning, he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper, saying, 'Take good care of him. If it costs any more, put it on my bill. I'll pay you on my way back.' What do you think? Which of the 3 became a neighbor to the man attacked by robbers?" "The one who treated him kindly," the religion scholar responded. Jesus said, "Go and do the same." This is the gospel of Christ.
Praise to Christ, the Word.
It's so good to see you all this morning. And I want to say before, at the beginning, that I have wrestled all week about what new could be possibly said about this story. Everybody knows it, and who am I to try to add anything to it? So I did my typical thing, which is a bunch of research to try to figure out if there was any new angles. And I'll give you the new angles first, so we can get those out of the way and get to the real message. Let's see. First of all, according to the Jewish Encyclopedia, published in 1906 by Funk and Wagnalls, I thought this was very interesting. From the Jewish perspective, this story existed before it existed in the Christian Bible. It existed before in the Jewish tradition. And the 3 people were the priest, the Levite, and an ordinary Israelite. Those were the 3 people, and it was the ordinary Israelite who took pity on the person. It was obviously changed, and it's very interesting. I couldn't find out why they would say this, but it said at the end of it, no Samaritan would have been found on the road between Jericho and Jerusalem. So we'll come back to that. That's from the Jewish perspective. And I looked up the encyclopedia, and they consider it one of the most, it's a brilliant encyclopedia, and it's now, because it was published in 1906, it's now completely available online for free. It's thousands of pages. It is gorgeous. I mean, it's just amazing what you have. The Jewish historians and scholars all put their best efforts into this thing 100 years ago. It's a pretty remarkable document. Not everything is explained, but there must be 10 pages on just Samaria, and the whole idea of what it is to be a Samaritan, which we won't get into. Then I thought of a reference. I thought, isn't there a Good Samaritan law? Remember the Good Samaritan law? So since we're going to talk about neighbors today and being neighborly and what that might mean, I thought that we just remember, we might come back to the whole idea of why we needed a Good Samaritan law. A very interesting thing. And then Samaritanism. Again, probably Ray and some other people might know, but it is actually a religion practice, and there are less than 1,000 practitioners currently of Samaritanism. They existed all the way back 2,000 years ago, and when Jesus referred to the Samaritans, he was really referring to a religious sect of the Jews. And they had some differences. The differences, as I read the history of it, the differences were political, but eventually they were really purely theological. And so they were theological differences, and that's why the story of the Samaritan is what must have been so shocking in those days. The road to Jericho. Now, Jerusalem is 2,300 feet above sea level. So if you've ever been to Jerusalem, it's 2,300. Jericho is near the Dead Sea and is 1,300 feet below sea level. So that's a fairly, therefore, in about 20 miles, which is the road, about 20 miles, the road drops 3,600 feet in 20 miles. Rusty also told me that in the Gospel of Luke, when you talk about going down, something bad is going to happen. So when you talk about going up, something good is going to happen, but when you talk about something bad. So Luke says he goes down to Jericho from Jerusalem. So, and it is true that was called the Bloody Way. The road was called the Bloody Way. It had a lot of rocky gaps, and it was called a happy hunting ground for robbers. So there was real relevance to the story. I think that we have that. It's also known that no Jew would have allowed a Samaritan to assist or comfort him unless he was extremely helpless and not conscious even. The belief was that if the man who was robbed had not been unconscious, that Samaritan would have said, go away. So, and I think, Ray, you have a wonderful take. We're going to come back to your take on why this story is so significant about Christianity. You just shared it with me. I think it's really remarkable. We'll get to it in just a second. But first, I wanted to cover, another piece of information I thought was interesting. Today, where the inn was, where he took the Samaritan, just to show how amazing this story is, there is now an Orthodox Christian monastery on the site where there was on that road an inn. So it's still in existence, and it still welcomes people who want to walk the road. You can stay at the monastery as there and get refreshment, just like the Samaritan did. So if anybody ever wants to do that walk, I don't know if I can handle it at my age, but I might be able to handle a 16, as long as I'm going down, maybe. Could be on the left. But I have a pretty good picture now of what what that is. But you know, I thought a lot about what the message of this is, and obviously, what Jesus was so wonderful at, and what Christianity is so wonderful at, is redefining things. And it's clear that the word neighbor was redefined. That perhaps up until then, neighbor meant more like it did in the Robert Frost poem that we read today, which is the person you put a wall up. Did you all notice that? Is Fran here?
Yeah, I can't
Fran was late, and she knows this poem really well, and she was going to read it. So I didn't prepare it really well to read, so you just had to stumble through my reading of it. But I chose that poem because it seemed to me that there was a great message there. You build a wall, and so that your apple trees don't go into the pine orchard. And we built this wall here, and everybody's really proud of the wall. But Robert Frost was commenting, and I think saying, and Fran, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Well, why do we consider ourselves good neighbors if we're building a wall between each other? I mean, isn't that sort of a metaphor for what human beings do when they're not being good neighbors? You build wall, or maybe a wall is not a bad thing sometimes, you know? So to me, that was a poem that really investigates that. And they work so hard to build the wall, and the neighbor says, oh, we're such a great neighbor, and yet what they're doing is building a wall. And he said there were no cattle, you know, there were no wild animals to get. It was just, and the neighbor was working every time. He worked every spring to rebuild the wall. So that's, I guess, is what I wanted to get to. I have some ideas about redefining neighborliness, and what I came up with was a couple of ideas I'd like to share with you and discuss. First one is what it means to be a good neighbor. I have this sort of spiritual definition of being a good neighbor that I was looking at my own life this week, and how I what I think, and when I'm at my best and when I'm not at my best. And this is what I came up with. I never really thought of this before. But I'm at my best when I feel like I'm doing what I was put here to do. And so when I feel, oh, hi, Mimi. How are you? I didn't see you there. So what I mean by that is I think that maybe part of being a good neighbor is my responsibility in it is not how nice I am to my neighbors and how well I manicure my lawn. All of those things are important. But perhaps spiritually, it is how true I am to myself where I am currently. So maybe I need to just make that point in a slightly different way. Yesterday we had a memorial service here for a really wonderful person in the neighborhood who died, and I did that. I had to do the memorial service because Rusty's away, so I did it. And the guy was interfaith, so I thought it was kind of divine justice that I got to do his service. You know, he was into Ram Dass and Edgar Casey and all kinds. He was Jewish, and he was into God, and he was into Jesus, and he was into Judaism. He was a great guy, and it was an extraordinary memorial service for him. But I woke up in a really bad mood, and anybody who knows me knows that that's really rare. Yesterday when I woke up, I called a friend of mine and I said, I'm in such a bad mood, I'm going to be a horrible minister today. If I don't do something, you know, and I'm trying to pray and I'm doing everything and saying, God, please, you know, because I was just in a bad mood. And then it hit me. Wait a second, I said, you're an adult. You can put this aside and take care of these people. That's what you're here to do. You're not here to come in with your own agenda. You're here to take care of these people. And I was able to put it aside. But the great result was that I became a much better person. It wasn't rote. All of a sudden, I was able to do what I came here to do, which was to be present for these people, to memorialize this great human being who had lived. I was not in a bad mood the rest of the day. You couldn't have gotten me in a bad mood. Now, the other thing that contributed to the good mood were these three people right here, and Fran. Because Fran came and took care and made sure that everything got cleaned up. Irene had stopped over and done the beautiful flowers so that they had beautiful flowers, and Joanne did that morning. So when I came here, I was able to do what I came here to do. So this is my theory about how this relates to the Good Samaritan and being a good neighbor. I would be ready to take your comments. Is it true for any of you that when you're not being yourself, you're either crabby or maybe not the best neighbor? And when somehow, my theory is that, you know, and maybe in the message of Jesus it is, see, I think Jesus was pretty much always himself. I don't think he got into roles. And speaking of Ram Dass, there's a wonderful book that I thought of today. This guy's name was Rob, and that passed away. And Rob was a big Ram Dass and an Edgar Casey fan. He loved Ram Dass and he loved Edgar Casey. And I thought of Ram Dass wrote a book called How Can I Help? And this book is it was used in the seminary that I went to. But in the book he says that one of the ways to really and truly help people is to occasionally step out of your role. That we get into roles, and one of the roles that we get into is neighbor. We're in the role of neighbor. Now, by the way, St. John's, I think, was a really good neighbor yesterday. And I think it's really due to the three of you that St. John's was a really good neighbor. Those people, many of them who were Jewish had been in a church, and they were very moved by how welcomed and how beautiful our grounds were. They bought a tree, and his ashes are being placed under the tree here. And they never came here. They were just referred here from somebody who knows the church. And they said over and over to me yesterday, which I wasn't even aware of, how welcome they felt at our church. And Irene had taken the time to speak to Dorothy when she was here doing some gardening, and Fran was I mean, all open arms. I think, Fran, what you showed me this week is what it really means to be a neighbor. I mean, I hate to butter you up here, because if I ask her to do something, you know, like, could you photocopy this, she'll have to do it now. But I really don't say it in that spirit. You really have been wonderful with people. I've had to be here, you know, since Thursday, and I've seen her just be so welcoming and open. People stop in the church all the time and ask about donations, and she's the Good Samaritan for me. She's the example of Good Samaritan for me this week. But, you know, I thought, how can we take sort of a new look or another look? And it came to me, Ram Dass says, unless you can step out of your roles occasionally and let your role go by, you'll get stuck in it. So you become a prisoner of your roles. My friend Veronica, who comes here, Veronica, does anybody know Veronica? She comes here and she's a minister, and she sits in the back line. She's really a very good friend of mine. She does something about roles that I think is really spectacular. She is a minister she's heterosexual, but she's a minister and a pastor for a gay and lesbian church in the Bronx. An interfaith gay, lesbian, transgender church in the Bronx, the first one ever. And she is the co-pastor of that church with a gay man. Both of them are interfaith ministers. Now, Veronica has inspired me so much because she does a meditation every week at her church. And one of the things she says to people is, close your eyes and take away all your labels. You're not a man, you're not a woman, you're not gay, you're not straight. You're just a soul in a body. And you're not rich, you're not poor, you're not whatever. You're just a soul in a body. You're a creation of God, or you're a part of God, however you believe it. And she does a meditation she calls it without labels. And I think that's kind of the message that I wanted to take out of the Good Samaritan today. I think what is so amazing as I get to know through this church, through how you study the Bible during these services, and how you wrestle with the real message of Christianity. I think that one of the things that Christianity does so amazingly well is to take a label and redefine it, or make it obsolete. In this piece, neighbor is really made obsolete. That person helps another human being. And I think that's so inspiring, the idea of just dropping the fact that I'm a Samaritan, or I'm a this, or I'm a that. And there's a person bleeding, and I help that person. Now, Veronica wrote a poem a couple of days ago and emailed it to me. And it's very short. I just like to read it to you. It's called The Solution. It rained a solution from the skies, and that solution was known as peace, found in its ability to dissolve the skin, man's skin. Alas, one skin. One could no longer discern a difference and point. He's black, she's white, he's yellow, she's red, they're green. So now there is one less thing which man has to judge her fellow man. And now we need a solution for religion. But instead, it rained a solution of love. And that solution embraced all, Protestants, Catholics, Muslims, and Jews. That solution of love caused chaos, for it was still one less thing with which man has to judge his fellow man. And if there's any message that I get out of the Good Samaritan, it's that person, whoever that represented, suddenly was able to drop his role. He was able to not think of himself as a Samaritan, I think, at that moment. He was able to see himself, if we take the parable at its own, is able to see himself beyond his own type, as if he closed his eyes to who he was. And he saw himself as a human being, and there was another human being hurting. And I think that that is, to me, Christianity in a nutshell. If there's anything that I love about Christianity, it's the fact that we constantly are called to just be another human being helping another human being. That it isn't about our labels, our roles, our sex, our beliefs. Christians don't even agree on what they believe. But it doesn't seem to bother anybody because there's a higher calling. There's a neighbor doesn't have to mean the person you build a wall with. It means something else. It can mean something at any time. It can mean something else. You know, we all know Renee Pyle. I think it was Renee who, in April, sent something to Rusty. And this is obviously very, you know, if there's nothing else that I'm a bleeding heart. You know, this is anybody who knows me knows that I'm a bleeding heart, and it's kind of embarrassing, you know, I mean. But Renee's message, and I put it up on my bulletin because I wanted to remember this. There are 6.5 billion people on our planet Earth, and 1.2 billion of them live on 23 cents a day. 2 billion have no electricity. 2 billion people on our planet. And maybe that's a good thing. I mean, you know, electricity has its problems. But 80% of all people, 80% live in substandard housing in our world, on our planet. 1 billion people are without safe drinking water. 1 out of every 6 persons on our planet. So the good news is, you know, I just watched The Secret. Did anybody watch the movie The Secret or heard of it? Well, The Secret would say, switch that around. 5 billion people have safe drinking water. So I don't want to get into the negative part of it, but 1 billion of our fellow human beings on this planet do not have safe drinking water. Every 16 seconds, and this is where the bleeding heart comes in, sorry, every 16 seconds someone dies of hunger on our planet. That's hard for me to take. That's very hard. I think because I know deep down in my side it's preventable. I think that because maybe it could be 1 every, you know, year instead of just every 16 seconds. I think it's preventable, and that's what breaks my heart, I think. On the other hand, so many people, so many billions of people eat and have enough. I don't want to present a bad picture, but 10.5 million children less than 5 years old passed away in 2006. See? Here's the bleeding heart part. I'll get it to go in a second. That just does it to me. So I didn't read it to be a bleeding heart. What I read it for was to remind us of maybe a new definition of neighbors. That's why, thank you. That's why I read it. I'll get it back in a second.
There's a professor at Columbia University. His name is Jeffrey Sachs. He's invented this concept called global village, and it's the express focus of eliminating poverty and people starving to death. And it's not so difficult. That's the interesting thing. I mean, for just a very small amount of money, you know, malaria is a very big problem. So there's mosquito nets that can be given. They have new and simple ways to clean water, and to make their Cooper Union has an exhibit right now about inventions for the third world. And they actually have made most remarkable, inexpensive things to help people who are in poverty. One of them is called a $100 house. And all the other little things like cleaning, you know, like a straw that you can drink that will clean the water wherever you are. And yet, you know, we need to publicize that because it's available.
Yes.
It's very hurtful to know that these people are out there dying like flies, children dying like flies. And so I certainly understand very much.
Thank you. So I didn't bring up this sermon to make people feel bad about the state of our world, because the state of our world is, there's a lot of wonderful. As a matter of fact, there's mostly wonderful in it. I got a little caught up in it. I just wanted to give you a couple facts about neighbors. And I think that, for me as a bleeding heart person, one of the things that I struggle with and is I can't bleed for the entire planet. I won't have a life. I'll just sit home and cry all day. So, I know that that's not real. But at the same time, it gnaws at me. How can I be a better neighbor? And I'm worried, when I ask that question, I think about the person who lives on the right of me and the person who lives on the left of me. I think that if there's no more discussion, if nobody has anything to say or wants to say anything, there's, oh, good, so come.
No, go ahead with your point.
The point, I think St. John's is a wonderful neighbor. And I really think that this is where I begin to understand Rusty's beloved community concept, and the Christian, and it's not only his concept, it's a concept that is taking hold in more liberal versions of Christianity throughout all of the denominations. The idea that as a community, we can do something. And I think that it's an amazing time we live in, where people are coming up with $25 solutions. You know what we did? We gave a lamb. And we gave a lamb to somebody. That lamb, what they do is they get that lamb to have other lambs. And they don't butcher that lamb. They get that lamb to have other lambs. And in 5 years, they can bring a village out of poverty with a lamb and a cow. A whole village of people in somewhere in the world in 5 years can go from, with a lamb and a cow. So I do think that, it's not, we have to figure out as neighbors how to mobilize our lives so that we can truly have some version of the beloved community on earth. And the only other thing that I'll say is I think that a great hope for me is obviously it's beyond me. I can't make it happen. I wish I could do something to make a huge swipe. Not just one, but a huge swipe. But I can't. But somehow or another, this idea of community really makes it possible. Okay, John, and then.
Thinking of the Good Samaritan and your neighbor, you're even nicer, you're not nice to your neighbor. And I think of St. John's in its own little way. Through Joanne, we're helping Father Damien, and he is helping the poor, I believe. Joanne
says he helps these nuns that serve the poorest of the poor.
The poorest of the poor are able to take advantage of the leftovers from our tax zone. That is a good sign. That is a good deed. The other thing I want to ask about is this. Obviously, Fran and Irene and Joanne and you help these neighbors to have a memorial service for a person. And if that's not a Good Samaritan, I don't know what a Good Samaritan is. But what I'm curious about is, how did we become involved in, I think it's wonderful, but how did we become involved in doing this for this person?
It was through somebody who had visited the church and knew this woman, Dorothy, the widow, and had said, when it comes time, when he's only got a little while, you better make some plans about what you'd like to do. And there's this really nice church I went to that has these beautiful grounds, and maybe you could go talk to them as one of the places. And then after that, he took a turn for the worse. So it wasn't a week or so later and that was during a woman came here for that interfaith gay and lesbian service. Her name was Norma. And turns out she's a a master teacher for Sai Ma, but she came here to be part of it. And then she was very taken. It turns out she's a neighbor of Rusty's. She lives in Hartsdale. And she really liked the church. And her friend Dorothy's husband, Rob, who passed away, she knew he was dying and they were looking for a venue. So she suggested she come here. It's a word of mouth.
But
You just never know.
isn't it a wonderful thing that she could ask and we would gladly receive?
Yeah.
And I think, not criticizing any church or any body, but I think of how many would say, well, you know, you're not a member of our church, or you're not a member of our religion, or you know what I'm saying?
Oh, sure.
They can think of all sorts of reasons for saying no. Other bodies or other churches, we gladly accepted this and tried to do our best. And you're doing your best.
Oh, well, wonderful. Frank was next and then you. Okay.
I very much got your point about being a neighbor also means sharing yourself, and being true to yourself or displaying yourself. And I think you gave a perfect example of it. Your sensitivity allowed you to display your emotion, and I think that heightened the awareness for all of us and our own sensitivity to those problems. So, and I just want to thank you for.
I cry at the last seat come home commercial. Me crying is no big deal. And then, you know, I mean, I don't know why this is. This has been going on for about 10 years. I need to see a therapist.
I wanted to say, Rusty always said when we do various things, be they tag sales or other events, that it's not just about fundraising, it's about friend raising. And it's true, and we've seen it happen many times, that people who have come for some other purpose either end up joining the church or talking about us to other people who in turn come to see us. But I thought it was interesting, the music that they played yesterday. I asked you what they were going to play. And although he was Jewish, what was the song?
He chose Amazing Grace and Morning Has Broken, which we did in his honor today. Yeah. Anyone else? Yes.
What you're saying, I think there's a lot of also metaphors for why sometimes we don't take the steps to be a good neighbor. I think many times we feel that there is nothing that we can do, or because we don't stop to think again, to step out of our roles, that even a smile or some gesture, a small gesture, will make a big difference, and that's living with intention. Just having that awareness that even the smallest thing can, as Rusty says, lift somebody up, can make a difference, and you never know how. You never know how that's going to spread out. And I think about the land and these other programs. It's the same thing. I mean, it's a small thing. It didn't cost much money, but it's going to make a huge difference in the lives of many, many people. And that's, I think, what is the most important thing to keep in mind as you go through your day.
Yeah, I agree.
One of the criticisms that our task force gets is when you're not substantially affecting the problem of thousands of gay kids in the streets of New York. You're only setting up a shelter that can have 8 to 10 kids in it. But now we're working right now to set up our 4th shelter. So I am greatly a believer of you just have to keep going. You have to believe you can do it and try to get more and more people involved in it. And forget this criticism, well, there's only 8 here or 10 there or so forth, and just keep moving. Because before you know it, you don't have 8, you don't have 10, you have 30. So I think it's a lot depends on determination and just keep moving and ignore the criticisms that you get.
I have a caveat to throw in here, and that has to do with anything that's passed around on the internet. Because we don't know that those statistics are real. They could be much better, and they could be much worse.
Well, those statistics were, they had what do you call it?
A source?
A source.
Many of these things do, and that doesn't make them real.
Well,
So
I would really like to not take issue on that.
They could be much worse. They could be much better. But I think the important thing is to be in awareness that there are people who have less, that there are people right next to us who have less, that all of us could be more welcoming to everybody in everything we do, and inclusive. And I think that's one of the messages of this church that's so especially beautiful.
I think, you know, I hear that. I hear that. And inclusiveness is I guess, is a great thing to think of as a dropper of your, you know, of your identity.
I had a problem this week. I was coming home from the Amici event Thursday night. It was about 1 a.m. on the 2 train in the Bronx. And I'm nuts, but I have no fear of doing that sort of thing. There was a man who came into the subway car who had defecated all over himself and was walking around. And I really had a big struggle as a minister and as a human being with whether to get up and leave the car, because it was really an unbearable thing. And everybody, I mean, it was a mass exodus. Or to find the courage to stay there. And I got up and left, and I'm sitting here thinking about what you're saying and asking myself, how could I have done better in that situation by that human being? And I'm not sure, but I find myself up against things like that a lot in the city, and my own fear of something, and it's like, not that I'm St. Teresa, I'm nowhere near Mother Teresa, rather, or Amici, who had just hugged me. What do you do in a situation like that? What's the most humane, kind, and honest thing to do? So I'm ashamed in a way to say that I got up and left the car with everybody else. At the same time, I don't know what else to do at this point in my life, in my journey.
Well, I think I absolutely, I mean, who would know? These extreme cases I think are so difficult. But I do think that one of the clues that I kind of came to this week that I thought was interesting was the power, and I looked back in my own life and saw the power of being able to drop my role at a certain time with my students at the seminary. Boy, I'll tell you, I had to walk that line all the time. When am I the role of the dean and the minister, and then when am I just another guy on the planet trying to do the best I can right along with them. And it was when I figured out how to do that, to some extent, to drop my role as minister and just be Eric, the response at the school was so enormous. It was a tremendous lesson. And I did that really out of reading that round gospel, because that's what we talk about in there. It is I think it's a wonderful tool to try on. What will we do? And Veronica, I really have so much respect for her, because Veronica tries that every week. She gets up and reminds everybody sitting in the aisle that they cannot be defined by their sexuality in the eyes of God. And that is just an extraordinary message. And I give her so much credit and for bringing that lesson home to me once again. And perhaps it's just by remembering. I call it painting the broad strokes. Maybe I don't know how to do a specific thing, but in the broad strokes of my life, I can say, here's a tool I can pull out of my tool chest and drop my role when the time is appropriate to help somebody. Don't think of myself as this or that, or I shouldn't do that, or I wouldn't do that. I say, I'm just another human being on the planet. Let me just get back to that and drop whatever role I can and do what I have to do. And I think that's a wonderful tool. And I do think that's sort of the message of the gospel today was redefine. The role of neighbor was just redefined for pretty much all time. I mean, I don't think there's anybody who is educated in almost any religion that doesn't know what the Good Samaritan is. And that it's actually changed what the word neighbor means for most of humanity. And Ray, we'll end with what you said, because I think what you said is so beautiful and important about why you remember what you just said? Could you just say it? We'll end with that.
The Samaritan story is it's interesting. It doesn't really, Jesus is not pushing neighbor in this as such, although that's a very important part of the story. What the story is getting at, and the characters that are displayed, you have to have a Samaritan in there. In order to understand Jesus' parables, You have to look at it in terms of a very simple concept. He is painting an imaginary garden, but he's putting real toads in that garden. And that's what's happening here. The Samaritan is what forces the hero. He's listening, these guys are listening to him. Remember, he's a first century Jew talking to first century Jews. And he's saying to them, listen up. Here comes this. You expect, well, there's already a lot of anti-Semitism present within the, not anti-Semitism, anti-clericalism present within them. They didn't like the Levites, they didn't like the temple people, the high priest and so forth, because it was an extra tax. The Romans wanted the tax, the temple wanted the tax too, so they were not happy with those. That they passed them by, that made perfect sense. But comes now the third guy figure, this is going to be the Israelite. He's perfect right. There was a story where there's an Israelite that helps out. And that would have fit. So they were ready to put himself in the role of the hero. The Israelite comes and helps out. We're good guys. Suddenly it's a Samaritan. Whoa. Immediately now they're stuck. They can make only one interpretation. We have to identify with the guy in the ditch. We're with the guy in the ditch. And this is where the toad arises in the imaginary garden. You have to let your enemy help you. Now Jesus had already said, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. Now he says, you have to let your enemy love you. The normal response, if this guy was half dead but still conscious, he would have said, you're a sinner, get the hell out of here, go away. I'd rather die than take anything from you. But Jesus turns it around and says, here is the real hero of the story. Not the Samaritan as such, but the willingness of this guy to take the help, even if he's unconscious. Maybe that's what it takes. It starts off with an unconscious Jew being able to tolerate a Samaritan. Maybe the next step will be that we have a conscious Jew saying, all right, you can help me. So it's a different story. It is saying, you must allow your enemy to be good. It must be, you can't say you're an enemy if you know good, you don't do anything good. You will help me. And that's the point. So
in essence, you have to allow your enemy to step out of their role as your enemy and into another role. And there will end it for the day. Thank you.